E3 has officially kicked off, and I want to start off by going over my reactions to the big three press conferences, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, in the order they aired, starting with Microsoft. Now, this year's conference I thought was a little bit weaker than last year's, but still really strong. The biggest thing I had was that I felt like the emphasis on games was a little weaker, but they really came back when it came to accessories and features. To begin with, when it came to first-party games, they had a very strong start by finally showing some real gameplay for Halo 5, as well as finishing the show by officially confirming Gears of War 4, which I think a lot of people saw coming, and it's nice to know that one's on the way, and hopefully it's better than Judgment, but personally, I thought the trailer didn't do a very good job of building up hype. All it really did was say, yes, this is a new Gears of War game, here's a potential new main character, and it does look prettier compared to older games, since it is of course a newer gen system. Aside from those two big ones, we did hear about a couple other first-party games. There is going to be a Ultimate Edition of the original Gears of War. There's a trailer for a new game called Recore, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic looking game where you have a robot companion, you can change what bodies it occupies. There was also a look at the new Forza, as well as some talk from the Rare division, which talked about releasing a collection of 30 of Rare's most classic games, such as Banjo-Kazooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Battletoads, all in one disc for $30, which is pretty cool, as well as talk of a new pirate game they're working on, which it's not entirely clear if it's an MMO or just some kind of heavy co-op focused game, but it looks like it could be interesting, and it's going to be available on Xbox One as well as Windows 10. Now, aside from those games, there was some time spent on third-party titles, most of which were multi-platform, but some were timed exclusives for Microsoft consoles, such as Rise of the Tomb Raider, Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2, The Division, but most importantly was Fallout 4, because while we already saw gameplay for Fallout 4 the night before, the big announcement for Microsoft was the fact that the Xbox One version of the game could play PC mods, which is a big deal. Normally, when it comes to certain PC games, the biggest argument for why you'd want it on PC over a console is that you can mod it. And yes, there's also the argument that the game can be prettier on PC, but as far as just looking at an individual title, if the Xbox One can run Fallout 4 just fine, the ability to get mods that add different features could be a huge thing, especially compared to PS4. Now, as I said, the games were good, but the real strength of this year's Xbox conference were the features and accessories. First off, we got a look at the new Microsoft Elite controller, which is running for $150, but also looks really intense as well as highly customizable. I definitely want to get my hands on one to see if it's worth that price point. Second up, we got a demonstration of the Hololens, which we didn't get any kind of clear release date or price point. It was just showing off how it can be used with Minecraft, but the most important thing of this demonstration was that out of everything we've seen at E3 so far this year, this was the biggest sign of things to come in future gaming. You know, it was really intense to see this live demonstration of how you can actually look at this three-dimensional world you're building, moving, and manipulating it. It was definitely one of the most sort of wow factor moments for that conference. The biggest announcement by far, though, in my opinion at least, is the fact the Xbox One will be getting a software update to become backwards compatible. Now, they have released a list of what games are currently planned to be backwards compatible, and it is extremely small, but seeing as how this update isn't planned for release until this holiday season, it can be pretty safely assumed that the list is going to grow quite a bit until then. And what's huge about this is that, assuming that list does get to a big enough size to include most Xbox 360 classics, that means that the PS4 is the only current gen system that is not backwards compatible. You're going to be able to play your favorite Xbox 360 games on Xbox One, the Wii U can already play Wii games, while the PS4 is completely locked in modern day games, which is a big move for Xbox One. Now, later on in the same day was Sony's press conference, which a lot of people were curious about how they're going to strike back at Microsoft after that whole backwards compatibility thing. And while they didn't directly address that particular issue, they struck back pretty hard right away by basically literally making 3 different dreams come true. First off, they brought The Last Guardian out of vaporware and development hell. It is now planned for a late 2016 release, and we saw new gameplay for it. After that, they announced the Kickstarter for Shenmue 3, which, on the one hand, having a Kickstarter at a press event of that size feels really weird to me, and also, to be perfectly honest, I actually missed out on Shenmue. That's a series that I don't have a connection with, but I do understand it's a big deal that the third one is happening, and it's proven by the fact that it met its $2 million goal in just 10 hours, and it crashed the Kickstarter website right when it was announced. Third up, and definitely the most important for at least me personally, was the fact that they announced the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, of course, this is a third-party title from Square, and even the trailer itself did point out the fact that it will only be temporarily exclusive for PS4, but it was still a huge deal. And it was really a great curveball, too, because when they initially announced it, it sounded like they were going to talk about Kingdom Hearts 3, and then it was Final Fantasy VII out of nowhere. Now, those three announcements alone are huge. I mean, when you just list them out side by side, it almost sounds like some kind of crazed fanboy's dream of what they'd want announced, but it actually happened. But on top of that, the Sony conference also did a good job of covering a lot more games people cared about. As far as first-party titles go, they did close the conference with gameplay of Uncharted 4. We got more looks at No Man's Sky, which looks absolutely incredible, as well as a few new games in development, including Horizon, which is a new game from Guerrilla Studios that looks absolutely amazing. Now, like Microsoft, Sony did spend some time on third-party games. We got new looks at the new Batman game, a new Hitman game, Star Wars Battlefront, and Assassin's Creed Syndicate, but the most interesting one was the announcement of Call of Duty Black Ops 3, because while we already knew the game was in development, a new piece of interesting information is the fact that from now on, unlike what has been past tradition, all map packs are now going to have early access on PS4 instead of Xbox One, which is basically just a huge shift and betrayal, especially for fans that have been staying on Microsoft consoles and no longer have that perk. So overall, the Sony press conference was incredibly strong, with a very heavy emphasis on games, and games. However, there are some downsides if you were paying close attention. I mean, first off, as far as their first-party games go, pretty much none of them is scheduled for the rest of this year. They're all far future projects, which is still important and a big deal when they look that intense, but there's nothing to push people to buy it this holiday season just yet. The other thing is the fact that Sony basically completely dropped the Vita this year. I mean, you heard the mention of the Vita whenever there was a game that was available on PS4 and Vita, but that was it. No special attention paid to it whatsoever. Now, last and actually possibly least this time was Nintendo, which had a good conference. It wasn't a bad one, but there wasn't any really huge wow factor that came out of it this year. I mean, the best moment by far was when they opened the whole thing up talking about Star Fox Zero, which looks like it could be a ton of fun. They also introduced a new Legend of Zelda game called Triforce Heroes, which looks like 4 swords, but instead you only have 3 characters, and there's also this whole sort of like class thing going on where you wear different suits and it gives you different abilities. Now, aside from those two, the rest of the show was, at least for me, pretty much downhill. I mean, we did get a Metroid game, which a lot of people were hoping for, and it even has the Prime moniker attached to it, but it didn't look like what you'd expect a Metroid game to look like. It was a lot more cartoony, and it looked like it had a lot more in common with Metroid Hunters than it did with Metroid Prime, which is definitely not one of the better games in the series to reference. Aside from that, as far as other games go, we did get more looks at Yarn Yoshi, which continues to look like a fun game, but we already knew about it. We did have a few very amiibo-heavy based games announced, including an Animal Crossing game, and there was a new announcement for Paper Mario meets Mario and Luigi, which actually looks legit fun. That was one of the other games that I got really excited for. After that, though, the rest of the show is basically focused on amiibos, including even talking about having a Skylanders crossover where there's going to be a few special amiibo figures that are also Skylander figures. And then they talked about Mario Maker a lot, which once again is cool, but we already knew about it. So overall, Nintendo's press conference wasn't very strong this year. There were a lot of games, and a lot of them do look good, but there just wasn't any huge wow factor going on. And part of this, I think, is due to the fact that Nintendo just doesn't really care about press conferences anymore. You know, a lot of these companies are just doing one big press conference this time of year, while Nintendo has been doing multiple across the whole year with Nintendo Direct. So I think they just kind of treated this one like they would any other Nintendo Direct, and it just happened to be one of the weaker ones, which is a shame. So overall, as far as just the big 3 press conferences go, I'd have to rank Sony at number 1, because they had the heaviest emphasis on just games, and they had some of the most astounding ones to show off. Microsoft comes in at second with having a few good games to show off, some that we were expecting and some that we were excited to see, as well as having some really great accessories and features shown off and announced. Nintendo sadly comes in last for me, not because it was a particularly terrible conference, but it just wasn't very good and was easily outshined by what the other two had to offer. Now, there is a lot more information coming out of E3 to cover. I am planning on doing another press conference roundup video focusing on the developer ones as well as the PC press conference, which has probably aired by the time this video goes live, so look forward to that video going up sometime tomorrow. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know, as well as subscribe and follow me on Twitter. I'll be seeing you guys soon with more E3 news, but until then, I'm Kevin Kenson, and I'll see you guys later.